I think a lot of people can agree that the Gauge 1 models used in the television series were wonderful models. These models puffed on the screens for nearly 25 years before being replaced by CGI. Everything about these models is charming in some way. I always wanted to own a model from the show, but I don't want to pay absurd prices for the props or pay $700 for a replica. But since 3D printing has become more mainstream and more affordable, the Gauge 1 side of the community has taken over. There are countless designs for many models over many eras. From Season 1 to the hit era, it's all there. Some of my favorite props, however, are not Gauge 1. No, they are O-Gauge, and those are the Skarloey railway models used in Season 4. The narrow gauge engines were all smaller models to be able to scale better with the Gauge 1 characters. It was perfect sizing. However, these models proved trouble. They didn't have all the room to fit all the electronics in the tiny bodies, as it was the 90s, so usually they'd have a truck behind them. Thanks to prop collectors, we could see the drastic measures taken to fit everything. Look at this axle on Peter's Sam! It should be broken by now! Due to these complications, the narrow gauge engines were rebuilt to a larger scale the next season, and they still ran on O-Gauge track. It's also the reason that all 7 locomotives and the majority of the rolling stock have been preserved. Nowadays, the Gauge 1 community has found ways to fill a lot of the electronics in the small little engines, as well as make the rods not jam up anymore. What I'm trying to say here is that there's been more subject around the Season 4 models than anything. In fact, all the Season 4 narrow gauge engines have public files, thanks to NOAA, or the LBSC Thomas. And so, the moment these files were released, I knew I'd have to make my first replica. And who better to start with than the #1 engine himself, Skarloey. The files were released in February 2022, and I immediately got to printing. I slowly got everything printed, and the smokebox and body were done first. I immediately got to puttying. Then came the running board. The same process was done. Once everything was done, I began primering the shell to find imperfections. These were quickly fixed. I also added more of the separate parts, specifically his whistle and running board details. I think now's a good time to mention his cabless counterpart. I modded Noah's files to remove the cab, then printed it. I used styrene to be able to fill the hole that I couldn't in 3D modeling, this being where the cab would be. I primered it, and I decided not to continue this. After this, I abandoned the model, although he is now scrapped and living their life with Thomas Wooden Railway models. At least it was put to some use. Once I was satisfied with the finish, he gained his red. I used Rust-Oleum Apple Red for this. I thought he was looking pretty fantastic. Once the paint dried, I added a coal load using black aquarium rocks. While I was adding the coal, the smokebox broke, so I got to work on making a new one. I painted it black and used a gold Sharpie for the ring around his funnel. I cut styrene for the cab inserts and painted them black, then glued them to the model. I took a few month break on this model before coming back to it for the chassis. I printed it and the pistons with the body, and painted both of them. I got to work on the wheels, which were made by Deshani. I decided to use brass rods, and I glued them to the wheels. They seemed to work, until they kept breaking. It was alright though. I also added a piece of filament to make the connection between the whistle and the body. And this is how he looks currently. I'm not happy. In the time it took to make this, I learned a lot more about 3D prints. And I looked at Skarloey, and I just didn't like him anymore. The finish was rough and the small PLA bits looked off. Okay, here's the plan now. Strip the body down and repaint it. Get all the smaller pieces printed in resin, along with the face, and then focus on making the wheels function properly with the correct axles. Immediately after figuring it out, I began sanding down the old paint, this time using a method known as water sanding. I dipped smooth sandpaper into water, then sanded down all the particles that came off of the rough sandpaper. This will make it go back into the print lines and make the whole sanding process quicker and easier. Again, I used primer to check regularly, and he was soon red again, so I clear coated his body in preparation for another step. The running board suffered the brunt of it. I coated this thing in putty to get it smooth, especially where the sandboxes were. It got pretty smooth, but then I realized how warped it was. I decided instead of using this running board again, I go ahead and make another. Around this stage, I broke the smokebox again, so I made a new one, and broke that one. Fun fact, Skarloey went through 5 different smokeboxes. 2 of them never made it to the sanding stage. Soon enough, I had Skarloey's parts printed for a fresh start. I began the whole sanding and priming process again, using the new water sanding technique. I decided to wait for the new resin printed bits before painting the running board red. I commissioned the buffers from Bolt 95 alongside the vinyl for its lining. Yes, we finally get to lining, which was my favorite part. The process was easy. Apply to the body, then cut away what I don't need. I lined the tanks, bunker, and pistons, and it was done. It was super easy. I don't understand why people say vinyl lining is hard. You might wonder why I didn't use transfers. That's because it was more accurate to use vinyl. I clear coated the body soon afterwards, and then printed a new whistle. Much more accurate, and this one was fresh as it wasn't covered in paint layers. The smoke box was finally finished as well. No more breaking. Back to the running board. I added the buffers alongside the sandboxes, and finally I could paint this red. I then painted the buffers in a silver color, and finally glued everything together. I printed a new chassis to fit on the new axles too. More on this in a bit. Let's take a break for the face. The face came from Shapeways, rest in peace, and it's made by Rexecutions. I painted it a few times before finally getting it to my preferred look. However, the paint has layered up on this, so it's lost all depth. It didn't help that I redid the face, and now it's worse. But at least he has one. With the face done, it's time to add the nameplate and numbers. I printed these on regular printer paper and then covered them in packing tape. These don't look good, but they get the job done. Re-add the coal load, and I've done everything I can with the body besides the handrails. Which I still need to add. Finally, the chassis. I reprinted it to fit the new axles better. I printed the wheels and axles out, and the axles are also made by Dashani. I had to drill out holes in the wheels for the side rods, also made by Dashani, and I used Tech screws for them. Yeah, go figure, they were almost a perfect fit. I had to make Skarloey pretty presentable for my trip to Wisconsin, so all I did was add the regular side rods, no piston system as of now. It rolled so much better. And finally, after a lot of work, Skarloey was in a presentable state. Unfortunately, during my trip to Wisconsin, the chassis took a dive and the wheels broke. Other than the face repaint and the chassis fix, this is where the model has stayed. He's not perfect by any means, but given this was my first attempt at a project like this, I can give myself a pass. Other than that, Skarloey was a fun model to work on, and I'm happy to have something that is close enough to the original prop. That'll be all for this video. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see y'all in the next one.